The sleet came down like bullets made of ice. Beau Callahan stood on the porch of his ranch house, watching the storm turn the high desert into something alien and hostile. Each frozen droplet struck the tin roof with a sharp ping, creating a symphony of cold that drowned out every other sound. The wind howled through the canyon walls to the east, carrying the smell of sage and dust and approaching winter. He was 53 years old and felt every year of it in his bones. The ranch, 300 acres of stubborn land carved into the Arizona high desert, had been in his family for 4 generations. His great-grandfather had staked the claim in 1892. His grandfather had built the main house with timber hauled from the mountains 40 miles north. His father had drilled the well that still provided water, though it ran lower each year. Now, Beau was losing it all. The bank letters sat in a neat stack on the kitchen table, each one more urgent than the last. Final notice. Foreclosure. The proceedings. Auction date set. The numbers didn't lie. He was 3 months behind on payments, with no reasonable way to catch up. The cattle operation had failed 2 years ago when the beef prices collapsed. The hay contracts had dried up. His wife, Anne, had died of cancer 18 months back, taking with her the waitressing income that had kept them afloat during the lean times. He was alone now. Alone and losing. Beau pulled his coat tighter and stepped off the porch into the sleet. The cold bit through his denim like teeth. He needed to check the fence line along the eastern pasture before the storm got worse. Wires snapped in cold like this, and he couldn't afford to lose even the few head of cattle he had left to wandering. The walk took him past the barn, empty except for 2 old geldings and a rusted tractor that hadn't run in 5 years. Past the equipment shed where Anne's flower garden used to bloom in defiance of the desert. Past the windmill that creaked and groaned as it turned in the storm. The fence line ran along a canyon edge where the land dropped away into a rocky gorge carved by water that only flowed during flash floods. Beau walked slowly, checking posts, testing wire tension with his gloved hands. The sleet turned everything slick and treacherous. That's when he heard it, a sound that cut through the storm's noise. High-pitched, desperate, a horse screaming. Beau moved toward the sound, his boots slipping on wet rock. The screaming came again, closer now, edged with panic and pain. He rounded a cluster of juniper trees and stopped. He expected a loose calf or a coyote, but what he saw made his blood run cold. But real quick, before we reveal what was trapped in the canyon, if you love intense survival stories where the stakes are life or death, make sure to subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss the rest of the story. Now, let's see what Beau discovered. A filly, young, maybe 18 months old, tangled in old barbed wire that had been left behind by some previous generation of ranchers and half buried in the canyon's rim. The wire was wrapped around her front legs and chest, cutting into flesh every time she struggled. Blood mixed with mud on her coat, turning her into a creature of earth and suffering. She was emaciated, ribs visible through skin, hip bones jutting like handles. Her coat was matted with filth, making it impossible to determine her color. One ear hung at an odd angle, possibly broken. By all logic, she should have been dead already, but she wasn't. When Beau approached, she didn't thrash, didn't panic further. Instead, she turned her head and looked at him with eyes that seemed too intelligent, too aware for an animal in such distress. The look held something Beau couldn't quite name. Not trust exactly, but a kind of calm recognition. As if she'd been waiting for him. "Easy," Beau said, his voice rough from disuse. "Easy now." He heard boots on gravel behind him. His neighbor, Frank Morrison, appeared through the sleet, rifle slung over his shoulder. "Heard the screaming from my place," Frank said. He looked at the trapped filly and shook his head. "Poor thing. You got your sidearm?" "No." "Want mine?" "Clean shot, she won't feel nothing." Beau looked at Frank, looked at the filly, looked at the wire cutting into her legs and the blood staining the ground around her. "She'll cost more to fix than she's worth," Frank continued. His voice wasn't cruel, just practical, the way ranchers learn to be. "Look at her. She's half-starved, tangled up, probably been out here days. Vet bills alone would break you, and you can't afford broken right now. I know what I can afford. Then you know the right thing to do." Beau pulled wire cutters from his coat pocket. He always carried them during fence checks. He knelt in the mud beside the filly. "Beau, come on, be reasonable. "Go home, Frank." The filly watched him with those unsettling eyes as he worked. The wire had cut deep in places, down to all muscle. She would need stitches, antibiotics, careful wound care for weeks. All things that cost money Beau didn't have. He cut her free anyway. The moment the last strand parted, the filly tried to stand. Her legs buckled. She went down hard, breathing in wet gasps. Beau ran his hands over her, checking for breaks, for injuries beyond the obvious. Her legs were damaged but not shattered. Her ribs were whole beneath the starvation. She was young enough that proper care might save her. Might. "You're making a mistake," Frank said. But his voice had softened. He'd known Beau long enough to recognize when arguing was pointless. "Probably." Frank left, shaking his head. Beau heard his truck start and fade into the storm's noise. Beau looked at the filly. "Can you walk?" She tried again, made it to her feet on the second attempt, swaying like a drunk. Blood ran down her front legs in thin streams, quickly washed away by the sleet. The barn was too far, too cold. The stalls were drafty, and she was already in shock. Beau made a decision that Anne would have called foolish and compassionate in the same breath. He led the filly to the house. She followed with halting steps, leaning against him for support. They climbed the porch steps together, her hooves clattering on wood. Beau opened the door and brought a horse into his kitchen for the first time in his life. Inside, away from the storm, he could assess the damage properly. The wire cuts were bad, but clean. He cleaned them with diluted betadine, wrapped them with the last roll of medical gauze he'd been saving for himself. The filly stood perfectly still through all of it, as if she understood he was helping. Beau made warm mash, grain soaked in hot water, until it turned into gruel. He fed her from a spoon because she was too weak to drop her head to a bucket. She ate slowly, carefully, her eyes never leaving his face. "You need a name," Beau said. "Can't just call you Horse." She blinked at him. In the lamplight, her eyes looked almost black, deep as wells. "Shadow," he decided. "Because you appeared out of nowhere in the dark." The filly, Shadow, pressed her muzzle against his shoulder. The gesture felt deliberate, grateful. Beau sat on his kitchen floor beside a wounded horse and felt something he hadn't felt since Anne died. Purpose. The weeks that followed tested Beau's resolve and his dwindling resources. Shadow lived in the kitchen for the first week, too weak to be moved. Beau slept on the couch, waking every few hours to check her wounds, to offer water and soft food, to make sure she was still breathing. The vet, a woman named Dr. Carson who owed Anne a favor, came twice and charged him cost for antibiotics and wound supplies. "She's stronger than she looks," Dr. Carson said during her second visit. "Against odds, I'd say she's going to make it." "What breed is she?" Dr. Carson examined Shadow's teeth, her bone structure, the shape of her head. Hard to say under all that condition. Maybe a quarter. Horse mix. Maybe Mustang. Her legs are longer than typical, and her chest is deeper. She might fill out into something impressive if she survives. If. The word hung in the air like smoke. But Shadow did survive. More than survive. She began to transform. As spring crept into the high desert, turning the sage green and coaxing wildflowers from the hard ground, Shadow shed her winter coat and her suffering. The matted hair fell away in clumps to reveal something underneath that made Beau stop and stare. Her coat was black, not brown black or gray black, but true black, iridescent black, the kind of black that absorbed light and gave nothing back, like looking into a void. No white markings, no sock or star or strip, just pure, seamless darkness that seemed to shift and flow as she moved. She grew impossibly fast. By late April, she'd gained 300 pounds of healthy weight. Her frame expanded upward and outward, her legs lengthening, her chest broadening. She stood taller than any quarter horse Beau had owned, with a musculature that suggested power and endurance in equal measure. But it was her behavior that truly unsettled him. Shadow didn't act like a normal horse. She didn't graze with the geldings in the pasture. She patrolled, walked the fence line in deliberate circuits, her head high, ears swiveling to catch every sound. When a pack of coyotes ventured too close one evening, Shadow didn't run. She charged them with calculated aggression, her teeth bared, her hooves striking like hammers. The coyotes scattered and didn't return. She never left Beau's side when he worked, followed him like a dog, positioning herself between him and anything she deemed a threat. A rattlesnake, an aggressive steer, Frank Morrison's truck when it pulled into the driveway. And strangest of all, she seemed to know things. Beau was diabetic, had been for 10 years. He managed it with medication and careful eating, but sometimes his blood sugar dropped without warning. One afternoon in early May, he was working in the barn when dizziness hit. His vision tunneled, his hands started shaking. Before he could reach for the glucose tablets in his pocket, Shadow was there. She pushed against him insistently, nudging him toward the house, refusing to let him continue working until he'd eaten and recovered. It happened again a week later, and again. Each time, Shadow knew before Beau did, sensed the drop in blood sugar somehow, responded with urgent insistence that he stop and address it. "How do you know?" Beau asked her one evening, standing in the pasture as the sun set and turned the desert gold. "How do you know what I need before I do?" Shadow pressed her forehead against his chest. Her breath was warm, her presence solid and real. Beau had lost Anne, had lost his financial stability, had lost his certainty about the future. But he'd gained something in return. A partner, a guardian, something he didn't fully understand but knew he needed. The bank letters kept coming. The foreclosure date crept closer, but somehow, with Shadow at his side, the burden felt less crushing, as if having something to care for, something that cared back, made the weight bearable. June brought heat and the final notice. 30 days to settle the debt or lose everything. Beau sat on his porch at dusk, doing math that didn't work no matter how many times he tried it. Shadow grazed nearby, her black coat gleaming in the fading light. That's when he heard the car. The sound was wrong for this place. Not the rattle of a ranch truck or the growl of Frank's diesel. This was smooth, refined. The purr of an expensive engine navigating gravel roads it wasn't designed for. Beau stood as the vehicle came into view. A black sedan with tinted windows and license plates he didn't recognize. It moved slowly up his driveway, deliberate and unhurried, like a predator approaching prey. Shadow's head shot up from grazing, her ears pinned flat. She moved to Beau's side, immediately placing herself between him and the approaching vehicle, every line of her body tense with protective aggression. The sedan stopped 30 feet from the porch. The engine died. Silence fell over the ranch, broken only by the evening wind and Shadow's sharp breathing. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out. Mid-40s, Beau guessed. Expensive dark suit that looked absurd in the desert setting. Polished shoes that had never seen mud. Face that revealed nothing. Professional blank. The kind of expression government agents or corporate lawyers wore. He wasn't from around here. Wasn't from anywhere near here. The man's eyes went immediately to Shadow. He stared at her for a long moment, something like recognition crossing his face. Shadow didn't move, but Beau felt her muscles coiling beneath her skin, ready to explode into action. "Mr. Callahan?" The man's voice was smooth, Eastern educated. "Who's asking?" "My name is Thomas Webb. I work for a private security firm that specializes in asset recovery." He pulled a leather wallet from his jacket, flashed credentials that Beau couldn't read from this distance. "I've been tracking something for 6 months, and I believe I've just found it." He gestured toward Shadow. Beau's hand dropped to Shadow's neck. "You better explain yourself." Webb approached slowly, hands visible, movements careful. Shadow didn't relax. If anything, her tension increased. A low sound rumbled from her chest, not quite a whinny, more like a growl. "That horse," Webb said, stopping a respectful distance away, "isn't what you think she is. She's mine. Legally, that's complicated." Webb pulled out a tablet from his car, swiped through screens, turned it to show Beau. The image showed a horse that looked remarkably like Shadow. Same black coat, same build, but younger, healthier, in professional photographs. "This is Midnight Siren, purebred Murgeezy mare. 18 months old when she was stolen from a private estate in Virginia. 7 months ago. The Murgeese breed originates in Italy. Heavy cavalry horses bred for war and protection. They're rare in the United States. This particular bloodline is even rarer. She was being imported for a private collector when the transport was ambushed. 3 horses were taken. We recovered 2. The third," he gestured at Shadow, "disappeared completely." Beau looked at Shadow, looked at the photograph. The resemblance was undeniable. She wasn't stolen, Beau said. I found her tangled in wire, half dead, during a sleet storm. No brand, no tags, nothing to indicate ownership. The thieves likely dumped her when she became too much trouble. Mergese horses are notoriously difficult to handle for people they don't bond with. They're bred to choose their person and protect them fiercely. She probably fought the thieves until they abandoned her. Webb scrolled to another image, a document with official seals. The original owner is offering a substantial reward for her return. He's prepared to compensate you for your care and trouble. She's not for sale. Mr. Callahan, I understand you formed an attachment, but this horse represents significant financial value, and given your circumstances. Webb's eyes flicked to the house, to the property showing its age and neglect. I think you might reconsider. He walked back to his sedan, opened the trunk, and pulled out a briefcase, returned to Beau and set it on the porch rail. Opened it. Cash, banded stacks of $100 bills that filled the case. $100,000. That's the reward plus additional compensation. Enough to settle your debts and restart your operation. All you have to do is let me take the horse. Beau stared at the money. $100,000, more than enough to save the ranch, to pay off the bank, to buy new equipment, to rebuild everything he'd lost. Shadow pressed harder against him. Her head pushed against his chest, and he felt her heart beating, rapid, urgent, as if she understood what was happening and was asking him to remember something important. Beau thought about the night he'd found her, the wire cutting into her legs, the choice to save her when logic said to walk away. The weeks of feeding her by hand, the mornings waking to find her watching over him, the times she'd sensed his blood sugar dropping and forced him to care for himself. He thought about Anne, who taught him that the valuable things in life couldn't be measured in dollars, that loyalty and love and partnership were worth more than solvency. He closed the briefcase, pushed it back toward Webb. She's not property, Beau said. She's my partner, and I don't sell partners. Webb studied him. For the first time, emotion crossed his professional mask, something that might have been respect. The owner won't be pleased. The owner abandoned her to die when she became inconvenient. I didn't. That makes her mine. Legally, I don't care about legally. I care about what's right. Webb was quiet for a long moment. Then he pulled out his phone, typed something, showed Beau the screen. Case file. Midnight. Siren status, found, safe recovery. Not pursued notes. Current placement deemed appropriate. Owner bond established. Asset secure. I'll mark the case closed, Webb said. Tell them the horse was recovered, but that forcing removal would damage valuable genetic temperament traits. They'll accept it. They always do when the alternative is a traumatized animal worth nothing. He picked up the briefcase, walked back to his sedan, paused before getting in. She chose you, Mr. Callahan. That's not something that happens often with this breed. They bond once, completely, for life. You're probably the only person alive she'll ever fully trust. I know. Webb nodded, got into his car. The engine purred to life. Take care of her. She's one of the last of a very old bloodline, and from what I can see, she's taking care of you. The sedan pulled away, disappeared down the driveway, left nothing but settling dust and silence. Beau stood on his porch with a horse worth $100,000 and a ranch he still couldn't afford to keep. The math hadn't changed. The bank wouldn't care about loyalty or partnership, or the bond between a broken man and a rescue horse. But somehow none of that mattered as much anymore. Shadow turned to face him, pressed her forehead against his chest. Her breath was warm, her presence solid, real. We'll figure it out, Beau said, together. But figuring it out required more than just sentiment. It required understanding exactly what kind of creature had moved into his life. That night, Beau drove into town, leaving Shadow patrolling the perimeter of the house. He went to the small county library, a place he hadn't visited since Anne passed. He used the ancient public computer, typing in the words Webb had used. Mergese, Italian heavy cavalry, Frederick II. The images that loaded on the slow internet connection made Beau's breath hitch. They were horses of war. Originating from the Merge Plateau in Italy, they were bred during the Holy Roman Empire to carry knights in full armor. They were designed for bone density, for hardness, and for a specific psychological trait, the absence of flight response. Most horses are prey animals. Their survival strategy is to run. If they can't run, they panic. The Murgeese was bred to stand, to hold ground against charging infantry, to trample obstacles, to bond with a single rider and act as an extension of that rider's will. Beau read the descriptions of their temperament. Reverent to the master, hostile to strangers, high intelligence, aggressive defense of territory. He shut down the computer and drove home in the dark. When he pulled up the long gravel driveway, his headlights swept across the front porch. Shadow was standing there, not sleeping, not grazing, standing guard at the top of the stairs, her black form a silhouette against the weathered wood. She watched him get out of the truck, her ears flicking forward in recognition. "You're not a pet, are you?" Beau whispered, walking up the steps. "You're a sentry." Shadow bumped his shoulder with her nose, a gesture that felt less like affection and more like a status check. "You are safe. I am here." The reality of their situation hit 3 nights later. When a ranch dies, the vultures don't always wait for the carcass to cool. Word had gotten out around the county that the Callahan place was going under. That meant the property was vulnerable. The sheriff was 40 miles away, and Beau was just one old man living alone on 300 acres of unpatrolled land. It was 2 a.m. on a moonless Tuesday. Beau woke to the sound of Shadow moving. She slept in the paddock nearest the house now. Beau had reinforced the fencing not to keep her in, but to keep her close. Usually she was silent at night. But this was different. It was the sound of heavy hooves pacing with agitated rhythm. Thud, thud, turn, thud. Beau sat up, reaching for the glasses on his nightstand. Then he heard the other sound. Metal on metal, the screech of a bolt cutter biting into a chain. It was coming from the equipment shed, 200 yards down the slope. Beau didn't turn on the light. He pulled on his jeans and boots in the dark, his heart hammering a warning rhythm against his ribs. He grabbed the shotgun from behind the bedroom door, an old 12 gauge he used for snakes and coyotes. He checked the breech. 2 shells. He slipped out the back door, moving quietly through the sagebrush. The wind was blowing from the north, covering the sound of his approach. He crouched behind the water tank, peering toward the shed. 2 trucks were parked by the double doors. No headlights, just the erratic sweep of flashlights cutting through the dust. 3 men, maybe 4. They were working on the padlock of the fuel tank, trying to siphon the remaining diesel. Another was dragging Beau's portable generator toward a truck bed. Scavengers. They knew he was losing the place. They figured they were just taking what the bank would take anyway. But to Beau, standing in the cold dark, it felt like an invasion. It felt like they were stripping the skin off his family's legacy while he was still alive to feel it. "Hey!" Beau shouted, stepping out from the tank. He racked the shotgun. The sound was unmistakable, loud and clacking in the night air. The flashlights whipped toward him, blinding him for a second. "Put it down," Beau ordered, "and get off my land." "Easy, old-timer," a voice called out. It was rough, young, mocking. "Just clearing out some trash for you, saving you the trouble. It's not trash, it's mine. Bank says otherwise." The figure holding the generator dropped it. It hit the ground with a sickening crunch of plastic and metal. The man stepped forward, into the beam of his friend's flashlight. He was holding a tire iron. "Go back to bed, Callahan," the man said. "We're taking the fuel and the Jenny. You fire that scatter gun, and we burn the house down with you in it." Beau raised the shotgun. His hands were shaking. Not from fear exactly, but from a terrible, weary rage. He was outnumbered 4 to 1. He couldn't shoot them all, and if he shot one, the rest would swarm him. He was going to die here, for a generator and 50 gallons of diesel. "I said leave," Beau warned, his voice cracking. "Get him, Ty," the man with the tire iron said. 2 of the men started moving, flanking Beau left and right. They were confident. They saw a tired old man with a shaking gun. They didn't see the threat, but they heard it. It started as a high, piercing whistle, the sound of air being forced through nostrils under immense pressure. Then came the sound of wood splintering. The paddock fence, built of 6-inch pine posts, exploded outward. Shadow didn't jump the fence. She went through it. She hit the ground running, a dark blur moving faster than a horse of her size should have been able to move. She wasn't running away from the noise. She was running toward the aggression. The man on the right, Ty, turned just in time to see 1,000 pounds of black muscle materialize out of the darkness. He didn't even have time to scream. Shadow slammed into him with her shoulder, checking him like a linebacker. The impact lifted him off his feet and sent him sprawling 10 feet backward into the dirt. He hit the ground and didn't move. The man with the tire iron froze, his flashlight wavering. What the? Shadow spun, her hooves tearing up the earth. She didn't rear up. Rearing exposes the belly, a vulnerability. She struck out with a front hoof, a piston-like jab that caught the tire iron and sent it spinning into the dark. She placed herself directly in front of Beau. She stood broadside, creating a living wall of flesh and bone between him and the men. Her head was low, snake-like, swaying back and forth. Her ears were pinned so flat against her skull they were invisible. She bared, her teeth snapping the air with a sound like a trap closing. This wasn't panic. This was crowd control. "Jesus Christ!" one of the men yelled, scrambling back toward the truck. "It's a monster!" The leader, the one who had threatened to burn the house, reached for his belt. "Shoot it! Shoot the damn thing!" Beau stepped out from behind Shadow, leveling the shotgun. "You touch this horse, and I won't miss." But he didn't need to shoot. Shadow lunged. She covered the distance to the leader in 2 strides. She didn't bite him. She simply crowded him, using her immense chest to drive him backward, pinning him against the side of his own truck. She brought her face inches from his, exhaling a hot blast of air, her teeth clicking together right next to his ear. The terrifying intelligence in her eyes was visible even in the erratic flashlight beams. She was waiting for him to move so she could end him. "We're going!" the man shrieked, dropping his flashlight. "We're going!" Shadow backed up 1 step, just 1, giving him exactly enough room to open the door. The men scrambled. They dragged Ty, who was groaning and clutching his ribs, into the bed of the pickup. Doors slammed, tires spun on gravel, spraying rocks as the trucks peeled out, fishtailing down the driveway in a desperate retreat. Beau stood in the silence that followed, his heart pounding in his throat. He lowered the shotgun. "Shadow," he whispered. The mayor turned to him. The transformation was instant. The demon that had just dismantled a group of looters vanished, replaced by the gentle creature that had lived in his kitchen. She lowered her head, checking him for injury, nudging his hands, sniffing the shotgun barrel. Beau dropped to his knees in the dirt. The adrenaline crash hit him all at once, making his limbs feel like water. Shadow stepped closer. She stood over him, her legs bracketing his body, shielding him from the dark. She lowered her head until her velvet nose touched his hair. Beau wrapped his arms around her neck and buried his face in her mane. She smelled of sagebrush and sweat and life. "I get it," Beau murmured into her coat. "I get it now." She wasn't just a rescue. She was the cavalry. The next morning, Beau began to pack. The incident with the scavengers had clarified things. The ranch wasn't the land. The land was just dirt and rock that didn't care who owned it. The ranch wasn't the buildings. They were just wood and tin that could be broken or burned. The ranch was the life he carried with him, and he couldn't protect that life here anymore. Packing a life into boxes is a quiet, brutal kind of violence. Beau moved room to room, making piles. Keep, sell, trash. The keep pile was heartbreakingly small. Anne's jewelry box, the family Bible with the births and deaths recorded in fading ink on the inside cover, his grandfather's spurs, a photo album with black and white pictures of men who looked like him standing in front of barns that no longer stood. Everything else, the furniture, the dishes, the rugs, the tools, was just stuff. He worked for 3 days straight. Shadow watched him through the window, pacing the yard when he took too long, nickering when he came out to rest. On the final afternoon, Beau walked to the equipment shed. The generator was still lying where the thief had dropped it, cracked casing exposing the engine. Beau ignored it. He went to the back wall, where a loose board hid a small cavity. He pulled out a metal tin. Inside was the emergency cash he'd buried 5 years ago and forgotten about until now. $400, not enough to save anything, but enough for gas and food to get north. He walked to the barn. The 2 old geldings, Buster and Blue, watched him. This was the hardest part. He couldn't take them. He had a trailer, but he couldn't afford to feed 3 horses on a manager's salary, and the guest ranch only had space for 1 personal animal. Frank Morrison had agreed to take them. Frank had good pasture and a soft heart for old horses. They would be safe there. Beau haltered them, led them out into the sunlight. Shadow was waiting by the gate. She touched noses with Buster, then blew. A silent communication passed between them. A changing of the guard. Frank pulled up with his trailer 20 minutes later. "You sure about this, Beau?" Frank asked, loading the old horses. "They're too old for the move. They know this land. They should stay on it. And you? I'm too old for it too," Beau said, forcing a smile. "But I don't have a choice." Frank looked at the loaded trailer, then at Beau. "You're a good man, Beau. This land didn't deserve you. Take care of them, Frank. I will." When Frank drove away, the silence that settled over the property was absolute. No cattle lowing, no horses in the barn, just the wind in the windmill and the creak of the empty house. Beau walked back to the porch where Shadow was waiting. She was fully recovered now. Her coat was a mirror reflecting the high, desert sky. She stood 16 hands high, a tower of strength in a place that had been stripped of everything else. Beau sat on the steps and opened the folder the bank had sent. The instructions were clear. Leave the keys on the counter. Ensure all personal property is removed. Premises must be broom clean. He looked at the keys in his hand. 4 generations. His great-grandfather had died in the back bedroom. His father had taught him to ride in this yard. He had carried Anne across this threshold 40 years ago, both of them laughing, thinking they had forever. He stood up. "Come on, girl," he said to Shadow. "Time to load up." Shadow followed him to the old stock trailer attached to his pickup. She didn't hesitate. She walked up the ramp as if she were boarding a royal carriage, turned around, and waited for him to close the door. Beau checked the latch, checked the tires, checked the hitch. He walked back to the house one last time. He walked through the empty rooms. The footsteps echoed on the hardwood. He stood in the kitchen where he'd nursed Shadow back to health. The stain of her blood was still there on the floorboards, faint and dark, a permanent mark of the life that had been saved here. He placed the keys on the counter. He didn't look back as he walked out. He climbed into the truck. The engine turned over with a groan, loud in the empty yard. Beau put it in gear and started down the driveway. He drove past the windmill, past the equipment shed, past the spot where Shadow had saved him from the scavengers. At the end of the driveway, he stopped at the mail post. He rolled down the window and pulled the wooden sign from its hooks. Callahan Ranch, EST, 1892. He tossed the sign into the passenger seat. He looked in the rearview mirror. Shadow's face was visible through the slats of the trailer. She was watching the road behind them, watching the ranch disappear into the dust. Then she turned her head and looked forward, toward the truck, toward him. Beau wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, shifted into drive, and turned onto the county road. North, toward the mountains, toward the cold, toward a guest ranch and a manager's cabin, and a life that was smaller, yes, but simpler. The bank could have the dirt. They could have the wood and the wire. Beau smiled, a small, sad curving of his lips. They didn't get the cavalry. The foreclosure date came and went. Beau lost the ranch. The bank took the land, the buildings, everything his family had built over 4 generations. He sold what equipment remained, settled what debts he could, walked away from the only home he'd ever known. But he kept Shadow. He found work at a guest ranch 50 miles north, a place that needed a manager, someone who understood horses and land and the quiet dignity of hard work. The pay was modest but steady. The housing was basic, a small cabin behind the main lodge, but it had a paddock and a shelter for Shadow. She went where Beau went, adjusted to new surroundings without complaint, continued her vigilant watch over him, her uncanny ability to sense when he needed her. The guests loved her. Children would stand at the fence and stare at the impossibly black horse who moved like liquid night. Adults would ask about her breed, her story. Beau would tell them about finding her in a storm, about choosing to help when help was costly. He didn't mention the stranger or the briefcase full of money, didn't talk about what he'd given up or what he'd chosen instead. Some nights, when the work was done and the desert sky filled with stars that seemed close enough to touch, Beau would stand in the paddock with Shadow and think about value, about what mattered, about the difference between price and worth. He'd lost the ranch, lost the legacy, lost the physical connection to his family's history. But he'd kept something more important. Shadow would rest her head on his shoulder in those moments, her breath steady and warm, her presence a reminder that some bonds couldn't be broken by bankruptcy or foreclosure or the cold mathematics of debt. That choosing compassion over profit, connection over convenience, was its own kind of wealth. One evening in early autumn, when the first cold snap arrived and turned the desert sharp with the promise of winter, a truck pulled up the gravel drive to the guest ranch. Frank Morrison climbed out, looking older and more uncertain than Beau had ever seen him. "Heard you were working here," Frank said. "Wanted to check on you. Make sure you were, you know, doing all right." "I'm all right." Frank looked at Shadow, who watched from the paddock with her characteristic intensity. That horse. She turned into something special. She was always special. We just couldn't see it under the suffering. "I told you to put her down. I remember. I was wrong." Frank met Beau's eyes. "You were the smart one, the brave one. I've been thinking about that night a lot, how I choose practical over rightmost. Times. How that's made my life smaller somehow." Beau didn't know what to say to that. Anyway, Frank pulled an envelope from his jacket. "Some of the neighbors, we heard about the foreclosure. We know it wasn't fair. We took up a collection. It's not much, but..." He held out the envelope. Inside was $1,700 in checks and cash. "Frank, I can't..." "You can, and you will. You saved a dying horse with your last medical supplies. Let us help you for once." Beau took the envelope, felt the weight of it. Not the money, that was light. The weight of community. Of people who'd watched him choose compassion over sense and decided that maybe compassion deserves support. "Thank you." Frank nodded, climbed back in his truck, started to leave, then stopped and leaned out the window. "That black horse of yours, she's something else. Like she's guarding you from the world. She is. Good. Man like you deserves guarding." Frank drove away. Beau stood holding an envelope of money that wouldn't save a ranch but might save something more important. Faith that choosing right over easy mattered, that kindness created ripples, that bonds forged in suffering and maintained through loyalty were worth more than land or legacy, or any amount of cash. Shadow nickered from the paddock. Beau walked over, climbed the fence, sat on the top rail. She came to him immediately, pressing her massive head against his chest, her black coat gleaming in the fading light. "We're doing all right," Beau said, "aren't we?" She didn't answer, didn't need to. The answer was in her presence, in her unwavering vigil, in the way she'd chosen him that night in the storm, and never wavered from that choice. The sun set over the desert, painting the sky in shades of copper and gold. Somewhere 100 miles away, Beau's family ranch operated under new ownership. Somewhere further east, a wealthy collector had accepted the loss of a valuable horse and moved on to other acquisitions. But here, in a small paddock behind a guest ranch, a man and a horse stood together in the twilight, bound by something more valuable than bloodlines or bank accounts. They'd both been broken, both been abandoned, both been written off as not worth saving, and they'd both proven the world wrong. That, Beau decided, was wealth enough for any lifetime. Shadow's breath was warm against his skin, her heart beat steady and strong beneath that impossible coat of black. And Beau Callahan, who'd lost everything and gained something priceless, finally understood what Anne had tried to teach him all those years. That value wasn't measured in what you owned, but in what you refused to sell.